So what if the very advice we've been given for decades, the whole just think positive and visualize your success thing, what if that is actually the precise reason we fail to achieve our goals?
I mean, it completely challenges the entire foundation of the modern self-help movement, doesn't it?
Right.
Because we are basically conditioned from birth to believe that visualizing the finish line is like the most important step in running the race.
Yeah, we really are. I mean, you look at the cultural water we all swim in, and we are just surrounded by this relentless cult of optimism.
Absolutely.
We have massive cultural phenomena like The Secret, pushing this idea that you can manifest a sports car just by thinking about it with enough intensity, right?
Just think it into existence.
Exactly. And you turn on the radio, and practically every pop anthem is about believing in yourself and making your dreams come true.
Yeah.
You walk into any middle school in the country, and you are guaranteed to see that classic motivational poster. You know the one. Reach for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land among the stars.
Oh, I know it well. But, that paints a very one-dimensional picture of how human motivation actually functions.
How so?
Well, when you look at profound art or literature or genuine accounts of human resilience, they don't ignore the darkness or the difficulty.
Right.
Authentic achievement actually embraces real-world friction, melancholy and grit. It doesn't just float around in this sterile bubble of happy thoughts.
Which is exactly why we're here. So welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Today, for you listening, we are taking a really close look at the intersection of human psychology, motivation, and these cultural narratives that we've basically blindly accepted for years.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It is. We are analyzing the landmark research of psychologist Gabriele Oettingen, specifically focusing on her work in a book called Rethinking Positive Thinking.
And our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack the cognitive mechanics behind our goals.
Right, getting in the brain.
Exactly. We are going to explore the neuroscience of why starry-eyed dreaming actually drains your physical and mental energy.
Which sounds so backward.
It does. But we'll also look at a specific cognitive framework, something called mental contrasting, and a method known as WOOP that grounds those fantasies in harsh reality.
So taking you from, a passive dreamer into an active doer.
You hit the nail on the head.
Because, this cultural obsession with unvarnished optimism, it really feels like a massive trap sometimes. Especially when you look at how it plays out in large groups.
Oh, definitely.
You see this in the corporate world constantly. Like, a company decides it needs to undergo a massive change initiative, right?
Great, the big pivot.
Yeah, the big pivot. The executive team gets on stage, they paint this wildly positive, friction-free vision of the future. Everyone applauds, they print the new slogan on coffee mugs, and then, nothing happens.
Literally nothing.
Because they assume the positive vision is the fuel itself.
And that's where they are making a fundamental error in how the human brain processes different categories of forward-looking thought.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, Oettingen's research highlights a very crucial psychological distinction here. We really have to separate what she calls positive expectations from free-flowing positive fantasies.
So expecting to succeed because, say, you've done it before, that is operating on a completely different neurological track than just imagining you're going to succeed out of nowhere.
Yes, exactly that. So positive expectations are firmly rooted in your past performance and your actual lived experiences.
Like a track record.
Right. Think of a seasoned baseball manager. If he has a batter who consistently hits, say, .300 over the last 3 seasons, the manager expects that player to perform well in the next game.
Makes sense.
That expectation is grounded in historical data. And because it's based on reality, it reliably predicts future effort and success.
So it's a logical projection. You have the skills, you've demonstrated those skills, so your brain anticipates the actual outcome.
Exactly. But free-flowing positive fantasies are totally detached from that historical data.
They're just made up.
Yeah, these are wishful daydreams. It's you imagining yourself hitting a game-winning home run in the World Series, even if you've literally never picked up a baseball bat in your life.
The brain is just playing a pleasant movie.
Exactly, just a movie.
And here's the paradox that really stood out in the sources we looked at. Indulging in those detached, pleasant movies creates a literal physiological trap in our bodies.
It really does.
Oettingen conducted this fascinating experiment, the high heel study, that measures this effect in real time.
Oh, this is a great one. It perfectly illustrates the mind-body connection regarding motivation.
Yeah, so she gathered a group of women and asked them to spend just a few minutes generating positive fantasies about wearing a glamorous pair of high-heeled shoes.
Which sounds so simple.
Right, very low stakes. They were just instructed to imagine looking great, walking confidently down the street, turning heads. It's a super simple daydream. But before and after this short session, the researchers measured the women's systolic blood pressure.
Let's pause on the blood pressure metric for a second, because it's important to understand why they measured that specific biomarker.
Yeah, why blood pressure?
Well, systolic blood pressure isn't just about general cardiovascular health in this context. It is a standard physiological marker for sympathetic nervous system arousal.
Meaning what exactly?
It basically tells us how energized, alert, and ready for physical or cognitive action a person actually is.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second, though. Is a drop in blood pressure always a definitive sign of lost motivation? Couldn't it just mean they took a breath and, relaxed?
Well, in the context of pursuing a goal, relaxation is the absolute enemy of mobilization.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if your sympathetic nervous system downregulates, like if your blood pressure drops, your body is literally gearing down. You are entering a resting state.
I see.
And what the researchers found was that the women who spent those few minutes positively fantasizing experienced a measurable drop in that systolic blood pressure.
Wow. So it's like a thermostat.
How do you mean?
Well, your brain sets a goal, feels the heat of the fantasy, assumes the room is already warm, and just turns off the furnace entirely. You've tricked your own motivational thermostat into shutting down.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Oettingen actually calls this phenomenon mental attainment.
Mental attainment?
Right. When you indulge in a pure, ungrounded, positive fantasy, you are fooling your non-conscious brain.
Because it can't tell the difference.
Exactly. The brain's visual cortex and the emotional centers process that vivid imagery, and the brain essentially says, oh, wonderful, we did it. We achieved the goal.
So it literally can't distinguish between the highly vivid simulation and the actual real-world achievement.
Nope. Because the physiological response to both is remarkably similar. Your brain believes you've already crossed the finish line, so it signals your body to just relax. It saps the physical and mental energy, the literal biological motivation that you actually need to get off the couch and do the hard work required to attain the goal in reality.
So you are enjoying the neurochemical reward without having put in the effort, which just destroys your drive to actually exert the effort later.
Exactly.
And the data backing this up across different areas of life is incredibly consistent.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. Let's look at a weight loss study mentioned in the text. Oettingen studied women enrolled in a comprehensive weight loss program, and they tracked them over time.
A classic goal-setting scenario.
Right. And the women who harbored the strongest, most vivid, positive fantasies about looking great and easily brushing away the temptation of junk food.
What happened to them?
They ended up losing 24 pounds less than the women who harbored more realistic or even slightly negative images of the difficult journey ahead.
24 pounds less. That is a massive difference.
Massive.
And it makes sense because the women who imagined the realistic struggle were metabolically and psychologically prepared for the friction.
They knew it was going to be hard.
Right. The positive fantasizers had already won in their minds, so when they actually faced a donut in the break room, their cognitive defenses were entirely down.
Man, that's wild. And you see this exact same pattern in career progression, too.
Yes, the graduate student study.
Yeah, they tracked these graduate students transitioning into the workforce. The students who indulged in these ungrounded, rosy daydreams about landing a prestige gig and making great money, well, they ended up sending out fewer applications. They received fewer job offers, and ultimately, they earned significantly less money than their more realistic peers.
It even impacts interpersonal behavior and romance, believe it or not.
Really? How so?
Yeah, in studies observing college students who had a crush on someone, the participants who spent their time happily daydreaming about starting a romantic relationship were drastically less likely to actually initiate a conversation or ask that person out.
Unbelievable. So the fantasy just became a substitute for the reality. I guess, why risk the vulnerability and potential rejection of real life when you can safely and comfortably enjoy the reward in your imagination?
Exactly. Which brings us to a really interesting evolutionary puzzle.
Oh, for sure. Because if this mechanism is so detrimental to our progress, why did human beings evolve the capacity for it in the first place?
Right. Why do we have this?
It seems like a massive glitch in human software if our brains naturally want to sabotage our own goals with daydreams. Are there circumstances where a free-flowing positive fantasy is actually, functional?
No, it is definitely not a glitch. Dreaming is actually an essential human survival tool, but it's designed for a very specific, extreme set of circumstances.
Like what?
Fantasizing is incredibly beneficial, vital even, when you are in a situation where you have absolutely zero control over your environment and you are forced to just passively wait.
Okay. Situations where action is physically or structurally impossible.
Yes, exactly. When you cannot act to change your circumstances, dreaming provides short-term psychological comfort and prevents you from falling into total cognitive despair.
Okay, that makes sense.
The research highlights a specific case study of a woman named Rachel.
Oh, I remember this one from the text.
Right, so her boyfriend, Tim, was unexpectedly arrested and facing a potentially harsh prison sentence. Now, Rachel had zero control over the legal system or the judge's impending decision.
None at all.
Right, she was just forced to endure this agonizing waiting period before his sentencing hearing.
And anxiety during a waiting period like that, that burns an incredible amount of cognitive load.
It can be completely destructive to your mental health.
Yeah.
So to survive the wait, Rachel vividly fantasized about the judge miraculously recognizing Tim's good heart, making an impassioned speech from the bench, and just letting him go.
Wow.
Now, that dream wasn't going to influence the verdict in any way whatsoever, but it provided a cognitive buffer.
It protected her.
Exactly. It gave her the mental padding she needed to maintain her sanity and survive the waiting period without completely breaking down.
That's powerful. The sources also point to historical examples of this, right? Like an artist living in East Berlin during the Cold War.
Yes, the political oppression example.
Right. He was trapped under severe political oppression, unable to paint freely or travel anywhere outside the Soviet bloc. And he survived those years by vividly dreaming of walking the streets of Paris and visiting the Louvre.
Which he couldn't actually do.
Exactly. He couldn't physically escape the Berlin Wall, but the fantasy kept his internal spirit alive.
So when you literally cannot change your reality, dreams sustain you. They are a defensive mechanism.
Right.
But there is a second major, highly proactive benefit to daydreaming, even in situations where you do have control.
Oh, the virtual simulator.
Yes.
Daydreaming acts as a sort of low-stakes exploration tool to help you figure out what you actually want out of life before you commit irreversible time and resources to it.
Yeah, let's explore how that works in practice because it's super useful.
The text gives this great example of a pre-med student. They are sitting in the university cafeteria eating a cheeseburger, and they start daydreaming about their future as a doctor.
Very common daydream.
Right. They picture the prestige, the white coat, saving lives, all the good stuff. But because it's a free-flowing simulation, the daydream just continues to play out.
Right, the movie keeps rolling.
Exactly. They start imagining the reality of the hospital environment. They imagine the harsh fluorescent lights, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the brutal 14-hour night shifts, dealing with bodily fluids.
It's the less glamorous side of medicine.
Right. And sitting there with their cheeseburger, they have a visceral reaction. They realize, wait, I actually hate the smell of hospitals. I loathe the idea of night shifts. I really don't want this.
It's a profound realization, and it happens entirely in the safety of their own mind.
Yes. That ungrounded daydream just saved them a decade of misdirected effort and hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical school debt. They virtually explored the goal, felt the simulated friction, and realized the reality didn't align with their actual desires at all.
So if the pure daydream can act as a sedative, and our pre-med student used it to avoid a massive life mistake, how do we use that same mental simulator to actually get out of bed and get to work on the things we do want?
We need a cognitive bridge to turn the dream into fuel.
Exactly. And this is where Oettingen introduces the concept of mental contrasting.
Mental contrasting. Okay, talk to me about that.
Yes. Mental contrasting requires you to take your brightest, most vivid wish for the future and violently juxtapose it directly against the personal, internal obstacle standing in your way right now.
So you were crashing the fantasy into reality.
Exactly that. You're crashing them together.
Let's look at the neurology of how this operates, because the order of operation seems to be the absolute linchpin here.
It is the most important part.
Because I'm assuming if I just sit down and think about my obstacles and my flaws first, I just get depressed. But if I picture the goal first and then the obstacle, something different happens.
You've hit on the exact mechanism. Order matters immensely. You must visualize the wish, the positive outcome first.
Yeah.
You have to let your mind briefly experience that mental attainment. Your brain lights up with the reward. But then, while that positive state is active, you must immediately snap your attention to the internal obstacle preventing it.
Wow. So the obstacle suddenly becomes the specific villain blocking that specific reward.
Precisely. Because of how associative networks in the brain function, picturing the goal first and the obstacle second creates a non-conscious neurological link between the two.
It wires them together.
Right. The obstacle becomes infused with meaning. It is no longer just a random annoyance or a generalized anxiety. It is the immediate enemy of your dream.
And that wakes you up.
It does.
Yeah.
This non-conscious link triggers the mobilization of energy. It wakes up your sympathetic nervous system. If you start with the obstacle, you just generate stress.
Right.
Throwing a happy thought on top of that stress doesn't create the necessary friction to spark action.
It's the friction that generates the heat and the energy. And what I found most interesting in the research is the dual benefit of mental contrasting. It's not just a tool for pushing harder. It facilitates what the researchers call wise pursuit versus wise disengagement.
Oh, this is a brilliant concept.
Yeah. If you apply mental contrasting to a feasible goal, like let's say studying for a professional certification that you actually have the background to pass, the friction energizes you. The contrast makes you hit the books harder.
That's wise pursuit.
Right. But if I use it on an unfeasible pipe dream, let's say I decide I want to start a massive tech startup tomorrow, but I have no capital, I hate coding, and I completely despise financial risk.
A terrible idea for you.
A terrible idea.
Yeah.
Doesn't the contrasting just crush my spirit? Or is that the actual point?
That is exactly the point. When you contrast the dream of being a tech billionaire against the monumental internal obstacle of despising risk in coding, mental contrasting forces you to confront that massive delta.
It makes it real.
Right. Instead of falsely energizing you to run headfirst into a brick wall, it actually helps you systematically let go of the dream.
So it facilitates wise disengagement. It prevents you from wasting 5 years banging your head against a wall, allowing you to redirect your limited energy to a path where you actually have a competitive advantage.
Which is an incredibly healthy psychological pivot.
Understanding the underlying neurology of mental contrasting is fascinating, but Oettingen didn't just leave this in the lab, did she?
No, she didn't. She translated decades of cognitive research into a practical 4-step metacognitive framework designed to program both your conscious and non-conscious mind.
Okay, I love practical frameworks. What's it called?
The framework goes by the acronym WOOP.
It sounds a bit like a Silicon Valley buzzword, I have to admit.
It does, but the science backing it is absolutely ironclad.
Okay, let's walk through the mechanics of the 4 steps, because I really want to understand how this actually rewires a daily routine.
Let's do it.
So the first letter is W, which stands for wish.
Right. You need to isolate a meaningful, challenging, but achievable goal. Feasibility is the absolute prerequisite here.
All right, no tech startups if you hate coding.
Exactly. And it scales beautifully, too.
Yeah.
It can be a micro goal for the next 24 hours, a target for the fiscal quarter, or, a 5-year life plan.
Okay, so once you have that feasible wish locked in, you move to the first O, which stands for outcome.
Yes.
This is where you identify and vividly visualize the absolute best result, or feeling associated with fulfilling that wish.
You really have to feel it.
Right. You have to let your visual cortex and emotional centers flow and truly experience the relief or the pride or the joy of the outcome. You deliberately set up that mental attainment state.
And while that state is active, you immediately pivot to the second O, which stands for obstacle.
Crash.
The crash. This is the mental contrasting step in action. You dig deep to find the critical barrier holding you back.
And I really want to emphasize a vital rule from the sources here for you listening. It must be an internal barrier.
That is so important.
Right. It cannot be an external excuse. If my goal is to get a promotion, my obstacle can't be my boss plays favorites or the macroeconomy is sluggish. I have zero control over those things.
Exactly. If the obstacle is entirely external and immovable, then the goal wasn't actually feasible to begin with.
Right.
The obstacle has to be an internal reality. It's your own fear of public speaking, your habit of procrastinating on deep work, your insecurity, or maybe a specific feeling of guilt. It's the mechanism inside you that sabotages your progress.
Bringing us to the final letter, P, which stands for plan.
The action step.
Yeah. Once you've identified your internal obstacle, you create an explicit implementation intention. It utilizes a very specific psychological formula, an if-then statement.
Right.
Like if X happens, then I will do Y.
So if obstacle X occurs at time or place Y, then I will perform behavior Z to overcome it.
Let's look at the neurology of that if-then statement. Why does if X then Y work so much better than just telling yourself, I'm going to try harder this time?
Because it completely bypasses executive function and decision fatigue.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When you preload this if-then statement after visualizing the wish and the obstacle, you are transferring the behavioral trigger from your internal willpower directly to the external environment.
Wow.
You are literally programming your non-conscious mind with a script. When the obstacle inevitably appears, you don't have to debate what to do. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't have to weigh the options and burn energy.
The brain just executes the pre-written program.
Exactly.
The sources provide a fantastic real-world example of how this plays out on like a random Tuesday afternoon. They look at a woman named Tammy, a working mother who is dealing with chronic overwhelm.
A very relatable scenario.
So relatable. She gets home from her job every day, looks at the laundry basket, the dinner that needs cooking, the mail piled on the counter, and she just gets completely crushed by stress.
It's just too much all at once.
Right. She's miserable, she snaps at her kids, and the whole house is tense. So she decides to apply WOOP to a simple 24-hour goal.
Let's map her situation right onto the framework.
Okay, so her wish, the W, is simply to enjoy her evening at home after work without feeling completely overwhelmed.
Feasible.
Very. Her outcome, the first O, is the specific feeling of harmony and family closeness. She visualizes a peaceful house, laughing with her kid and connecting with her husband without a dark cloud of anxiety over her head.
And then she searches for the internal obstacle, the second O.
Right, and she realizes she can't just blame the laundry basket.
Right.
She digs deep and recognizes her internal obstacle is the immense perfectionist pressure she puts on herself to complete every single domestic chore the exact second she walks in the door.
That's a great insight.
Yeah, the obstacle is her own internal anxiety about a messy environment.
So knowing that internal trigger, she builds her plan, the P.
Her if-then statement. She decides, if I walk in the door and start feeling that spike of stress regarding the chores, that I will remind myself that family closeness is my actual priority, and I will deliberately leave the laundry in the basket for the night.
The cognitive rewiring there is just profound in its simplicity.
Right, because when she actually went home and walked through the door, the chores were still there.
Of course.
The pressure spiked. The obstacle appeared exactly as she knew it would.
But because she had programmed the if-then response, she didn't spiral into an argument with her family.
The non-conscious automation kicked in. She bypassed the decision fatigue. She ignored the laundry basket, cooked a nice dinner, baked cookies with her son, and went on an hour-long walk with her husband. She bypassed the stress and achieved her wish of family harmony, purely because she grounded her fantasy in the reality of her own perfectionism.
By confronting the obstacle directly, she didn't diminish her motivation. She localized it.
I like that.
She focused her cognitive energy exactly where it was needed to overcome the specific hurdle in that specific moment.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway here is incredibly empowering.
It really is.
True motivation isn't about slapping a smiley face over your problems. It's not about ignoring obstacles or forcing yourself to live in this fragile bubble of toxic positivity.
No, true motivation is alchemy.
Alchemy.
Yes, it is about taking your brightest, most ambitious dreams and bringing them directly, violently up against reality. It is the friction between what you passionately want and what is stubbornly holding you back that generates the actual physical and mental energy required to act.
You hold the power to regulate your own energy. You don't need to fake optimism when things are hard. All you need is a quiet moment, a clear wish, and the courage to look honestly at your own internal hurdles.
And we've talked a lot about individual goals today, but consider what this means for organizational structure and leadership too.
Oh, that's a great point.
If you manage a team, or if you're a CEO planning the next fiscal year, are your ambitious vision boards and rah-rah kickoff meetings actually sabotaging your employees' drive before the quarter even begins?
Wow. Are you relaxing them too much?
Exactly. Are we inadvertently sedating our teams by painting a picture of guaranteed success without anchoring it to the gritty friction of the daily process? It's something every leader really needs to examine.
It's time to tear down that motivational poster about landing among the stars and start looking at the ground beneath your feet, because that's where the real magic happens. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought, a provocation from Oettingen's work to take with you today. Ask yourself, right now, what is your dearest wish? And what is it inside of you that holds you back from achieving it?